Okay, then we will go ahead and get started. I'll turn it over to Alyssa, who will introduce Emilio, and then we will start our conversation. Thank you all for being with us today.
Good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to be introducing Emilio Amaro today. Although we had only spent a few minutes talking on the phone to prepare for this introduction, I was still really inspired getting to know Emilio and his life experiences. One of my motivations in studying environmental studies and pursuing a degree as a first generation was really to help poor communities back home and to go back home and give back that way. Because back home education is very limited, and most families tend to fall back into the cycle of poverty. And so, like Emilio, which you will learn about today, I want to help out those poor communities by sharing my knowledge and my experiences with them. So it is an honor to be able to share with you today Emilio's story, and it is truly a great opportunity to hear from him today. So thank you for taking the time to be here today, Emilio. We really appreciate it. So Emilio Amaro graduated from the University of Chapingo, Mexico in the year of 1975. The University of Chapingo is a nationally recognized school with high academia quality in education. With inspiration from his fathers and uncles, he strived to become a forest engineer just as they did. And so it is his family tradition to work for social justice within the forests, to help people who own forest lands. So upon graduation, he worked for the Mexican government, where he became an administrator within the forest department, working in different places across Mexico. Emilio has also worked with the federal and state Congress in creating environmental laws in order to support and protect the forest. At one point in his career, Emilio was responsible for about 18 million acres of land with only 2,000 other employees, including employees for reforestation, firefighters, and police foresters. Emilio worked on soil protection, wildlife, the control of harvest and transportation, as well as protecting the land from forest fires and illegal harvests, among many others. Not only did he work to protect the forests, but he also worked closely with people. Most people that live and own forest land in Mexico come from poor communities with no education. And because the systems in Mexico at the time relied heavily on investors who paid little to nothing at all to the indigenous people for their land, part of Emilio's job was to help organize the indigenous people into becoming entrepreneurs of their own. And so, due to the nature of his job, Emilio had gained a lot of enemies working to help poor communities against these investors. So after 25 years of working in Mexico, he decided to come to the United States in order to protect his family and even save his own life. So Emilio has a heart for people. Not only did he protect forests, but he also strived to protect his people as well. Emilio found his way to Boise State University, and he is now in charge of the beautiful landscapes around campus. He is also the president of the Association of Classified Employees, which strives to improve work-life conditions at Boise State. In his free time, Emilio enjoys reading about ancient and indigenous cultures, and he joins us today to talk more about his experiences in Mexico and his view on public lands of the past, present, and future. So please join me in welcoming Emilio Amaro.
Thank you, Alyssa, for that wonderful introduction. And I want to just say that I came to know Emilio actually my first semester at Boise State, and a colleague had taught my book in a class on North American environmental history, and one of the students in that class actually worked with Emilio and said to Emilio, "Oh, you might be interested in this because I know you used to work in Mexico." And so through that student, I was introduced to Emilio, who had done all of this amazing work on sort of following up the time that I had studied. So it was sort of this amazing and serendipitous introduction that happened through this process of reflecting on public lands. And so since then, I might see Emilio at speakers or around campus, but not nearly enough. And so I'm so gratified to be able to talk with him and you all today about his experiences. So my first question for Emilio then is for him to is to ask him to tell us a little bit more about his background and work in Mexico. Alyssa gave us a great outline of what that was, but could you tell us more, Emilio, about where exactly in Mexico you're from and how you became interested in forests and what sort of work did you do and at what different level?
Thank you. Thank you, Alicia. You left a little bit to me to work, to talk. It was amazing introduction. Thank you. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you, Emily, for this great opportunity to talk with you and your audience, and also to honor the memory of Dr. Fremont. So thank you for this opportunity. Second, well, I was born and raised in Mexico City. In like Alicia said, is in a family with tradition of getting involved in social justice. Um, uh, Four of my family members, including my father, studied in Chapingo and in forest related degrees. And I graduate, and well, I start my career at 15-year-old because in Chapingo you study the high school inside, just directed in agricultural general knowledge, and then you pick your specific degree after 3 years. So I spent 7 years in the school, and school is really revolutionary ideals in Mexico. Chapingo is known like that. So, well, feeding from my father and my family and the knowledge that I received in the school, I was really interested in follow that path in the forest, but not just the forest in the technical part, but also uh, I need to use my knowledge to do something else. And that was I was start working in helping the communities, mainly forest communities at first. Um, Before I graduate, we get involved with some communities, helping to do all the studies necessary to get the authorization to use the resources. And then training these people, organizing in all the legislature they need to cover, training in techniques to harvest the forest, process the products, and commercializing. So when it was probably 2 years before I graduate, we were working with these people in my vacations, in weekends. So I get involved in this process even before I graduate. I graduated in 1975, long time ago. So immediately we said, okay, in those times the government was probably all over everything. So the government, we saw it was one of the means to reach this goal. So we gathered 50 colleagues, and we gathered with probably 50 colleagues, and we went to the government and say, okay, we want to work in this area. So the forest department, we start working over there uh, as a simple technicians, doing inventory, and knowing all different techniques on the forest areas. And little by little, we will selling the idea that the forest activity in Mexico was was doing in the wrong path. So we need to change this. Fortunately, we met with the forest secretary in Mexico, and we sell the idea. Fortunately, this secretary was the son of the former president, Lázaro Cárdenas. So, well,
Cuauhtémoc.
Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas. So, yeah, we meet with him and we sell the idea. Basically, hey, we need to help the people to become entrepreneurs, because the people is with low education, with low opportunities. Uh, they just see the forest like a problem, you know, the problem because you cannot use it and other person are using it and giving me pennies. So the secretary Cuauhtémoc said, okay, let's try it. And in this process, they form two entities: the Direction of Forest Development and the Commission of National Commission Forest in Mexico. So through these areas, we have some room to establish this project with new techniques and with this new goal in Mexico. Um, well, little by little, we start working in the center of Mexico, basically around the Mexico City, um, uh, 6 or 7 states around doing this. And we start working mainly with the single communities, and then we build regional industries with this idea. And now, well, when I left Mexico, my experience, the people that was earning $1 per day per person, then were elevating the life to $100 per day per person. So, but most important, we elevate the self-esteem and the participation protecting the resource, because now you are having utilities, right? You have having money from the. So that was and when I've left, before I left Mexico or the forest administration, I was in charge in 2 states, responsible for everything: budget, protecting the resource, the harvest, national parks, every activity: soils, reforestation, pest and disease. So I'm promoting, obviously, the organization. So that was basically my work in the government from 75 to 86. From 86, I left the government and I start advising with this same goal independently, like a technician with um, other kind of civil organization, not with the government, but now outside the government. And in that part of the process, I work with the Federal Congress from 95 to 98, and I worked as advisor of the commission to change the law in those days, the 1997 forest law, um, giving more impulse to the commercial reforestation aspects and social introduction. So, and then, well, I was out of the Congress, but with my group, we were participating in many Congress and travel to US, travel to Canada, and having advice from different countries, Sweden, French, US, Canada, and improving all the techniques, not only in forest techniques, but also using machinery, to produce all the wood products, non-forest products also. So basically, that was my work in Mexico from 75 till 99, basically.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. So in your sort of broad biography of working both for the government and within the government entities, and then also as a consultant and an advisor outside of it, it brings out how different Mexico's forests are in their management from the United States. So I was hoping you could describe for students how Mexico's public lands are managed and how decisions are made to kind of a class of outsiders. I've given them the chapter that I wrote introducing my book that gives an overview of some of the institutions. But by the 1970s and 1980s, a lot of that had changed, right? And there were new entities that were there. So I was hoping you could describe for us what institutions existed, what their forms were, and how they worked, and also how it's different to the extent of your knowledge from how forests or public lands in general are managed within the United States. So, for example, you talked about being in charge of 2 states and in charge of everything, right? Everything from reforestation to soils. So if you could back up a little bit and give us a broader overview of what that management structure looks like, would be helpful.
Yeah, well, talking about public lands and protecting areas in Mexico, we need to talk about history if we want to understand Mexico. And most of the Latin American conquered by the Spaniard, because it's pretty much the same culture and the same process of handling the forest activity. And well, as probably you know, Mexico, well, they have a lot of indigenous people and a lot of the different cultures in the country when the Spaniards arrived. So in those days, we have the crash of two cultures. One, the indigenous people, well, living there for thousands of years, and developing one culture more understanding better the relation between the nature and the human being. When the Spaniard arrived, well, they were conquered. They were looking for gold. They were looking for benefits in the short term. They were not thinking in establish at the first expanding or mixing the culture. No, the original culture was pretty much destroyed, and in this clash. Well, the history in Mexico is the fighting between one vision of conservation, the rational use of the land, against the fast income, no matter how. So in the 18th century, this situation was mainly the government was really worried about protecting the resources, mainly around the cities, the cities in those days, because the demanding of wood and for burning, for construction, um, was diminishing the forest areas around the cities. And at the end of the 18th century, the government started creating some areas to protect the forest. So in those days was the first in the Chihuahua state. They declared some reserves. Also in the south, in Oaxaca, in 3 or 4 states in the south, protecting some specific ecosystems, preventing the destruction. Well, starting the 19th century, and with the influence the United States, French, German, with big reunions in Seattle, in Washington, D.C., in Paris, about what is going on with the natural resources. So in Mexico, they start creating the first public lands or reserves to protect. But basically, in those days, the vision was, okay, don't touch these areas. These areas needs to be to recover, and also we need to protect areas to produce water and avoid the dams get clogged because the soil is coming from the top to the bottom. So the government declared some reserves in basically the hydrological areas to protect dams and protect and give water to the agriculture areas. Starting the 19th century, that was the vision, basically. And well, in the first forest law was written in 1926, and it was a really good law, giving the people the opportunity to take advantage of the resources. But unfortunately, because the government had no money, all that idea failed. failed. So then we had the revolutionary movement in 1910 that was because the concentration of the land through the years in just a few hands was leaving most of the people in Mexico out of the possibility to have an income or the basic life. So the revolution brought a lot of, the goal was change this procedure and trying to give the people the opportunity to get a better life. And in this process, the country had a new constitution where the country owns the whole land. The whole land was, the country was the owner, the whole land. And then little by little was recognizing the indigenous communities, the private properties, and then create a new figure called ejido for all the people that have no land. And then he was designing this figure that basically was like the community, giving each family member one piece of land to produce the basic goods, and then a big area managed in common. This structure, the ejido cannot be sold. No, the land is for you, for your sons, for your grandchild. but you cannot sold the land. This is the unit to produce your basic, improving your life. So with this vision, the president, Lázaro Cárdenas, create the national parks system, like a system, and with the purpose of protecting the land and give some benefits to the people enjoying the nature and protecting the forest. And that was in the 40s, from the 40s probably till the 70s. We have that kind of idea, declaring national parks for recreation and protection, creating national reserves, protecting water, and also some of the wildlife, basically the migration between the United States and Mexico, because the birds, they travel, they travel for the countries, and some of those agreements allow to the country to declare different kind of public lands, like national parks, reserves, like the wildlife protection, and the 70s. So that's the main idea, the helping the social. That's why the revolution was in 1910, and the Constitution in 1917 was state people first, people first. And well, in this period, it's interesting to know that in one side the government was creating protecting areas, but on the other side was giving concessions to private companies to exploit the forest, giving or leaving the original people outside, the ejidatarios, indigenous and private properties, out of the business. So this wrong policy from the early 40s until 70s provoke that destructions. People was not interested in protecting the natural areas, and the companies, they were looking just for the easy money. Well, all this activity was ruled by the agriculture secretary, the forest area, through the different laws, different dispositions. But all this legislature was only in the technical aspect of the forest, and also in one limited technical use, not like the silviculture knowledge teach us in the school, different treatments, to produce. No, the legislature only authorized one system to harvest the mature trees, leaving the rest of the land untreated. Interesting thing was, starting in 75, the environmental movement. Probably in Mexico, we start knowing about that probably in 75. Some people before, but I'm talking about us, the foresters. We start having relationship with the biologists, with people interested in protecting not just the forest or the tree, but also the genes, but also the all the diversity, not just the tree and the system. No, the whole the whole ecosystem. So we start listening about the ecosystem. So in the 80s, big push in this direction. So in 1988, the the first ecological law was written, and then we knew that we need to have not just forest um, just forest studies, but also impact and mitigation uh, studies to protect protect the areas. Well, it's starting 80s and till these days, we have a legislation that is amazing. It's amazing. If you read the general ecological law of the forest development, whoa, you get surprised about the goals, about the what we want to achieve with this legislature. Unfortunately, the legislature and the reality, we lost the transmission belt to do these aspirations reality. You know, well, this is a really fast from the 18th century to these days, Emily. So
No, that's wonderful. There's a couple things I want to point out to the students to make sure that they're seeing how what you've described lines up with timelines we've talked about in class, right? So in the US, we've talked about the Homestead Act being a fundamental transformation of not just public property, but also of private property, right? And so that happens in the middle of the Civil War in the US in the 1860s. But Mexico undergoes a transformation of property that's similar in some ways after the 1910 revolution, right? And what is similar about it is it's the redistribution of land from private individuals, right? In Mexico's case, to communities, where in the US, it's the redistribution of land largely from tribal communities, right? And Native American populations to private individuals, right? So you have sort of a reverse process. And what's so interesting about Mexico's land reform, we don't call the Homestead Act land reform, but it is. But in Mexico, it's called land reform. And what's so interesting about it is it doesn't privilege the individual. Just like Emilio described, you become part of a community that holds land in commons. And the commons, as something that happens at the community level, is remarkably absent from US private land holdings, but also from US public lands, right? And I think that's part of why we get this sort of binary of back and forth between local control or federal control, right? Is there's not a mechanism like the ejido was to allow people a place to work the land and grow corn and beans and the things that they needed, but also to hold the forest or the pasture or the larger parts of that common area in commons and to really share it through a agreed upon governance structure that represented all of those individual plots in the same. So that's a really remarkable difference, and we can see how that difference kind of plays out. The other piece that Emilio's pointed out that resonates with some themes we've talked about so far is the slippage or the difference between what the law says and what actually happens, right? Or the sort of enforcement. And I love how you said that, Emilio, that the transmission belt was off, right? And so the amazing law didn't actually turn into how the forests were run or were worked or were managed. And we've seen themes of that, especially around the national monuments in the US as well. So I'd like to take that great background, and you've done a remarkable job synthesizing so much of Mexico's history there, and ask you sort of a more personal question and ask you if you'd be willing to share with us some of your memories from working in the communities that you've described or working in the forests. And this could be, particular events that were memorable or meaningful to you, or certain individuals that stood out? And it might be helpful too if you wanted to describe some of the forests. I'm not sure how many of our students have been to forests, but we're not talking about tropical forests. Most of Mexico's forests have pine trees and are very much like some of the forests in Idaho. So that might be useful too. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Well, the most of the satisfying that I had when I work as a forest engineer was the possibility to help this part of the Mexicans in disadvantage. And my experience was that we were always against the current. Uh, we try to change not just the way that the people saw the indigenous people, the ejidatarios, and the small private properties, because the big industry in Mexico, the forest big industry, not just in the temperate areas, but also in the tropical rainforest. The government was um, writing a really amazing um, laws and different controls, but in reality, they were protecting the few companies that they were using the the land and the forest. Um, the problem was we were kind of fighting. It was kind of a fight. That's why in this process we got a lot of enemies that even threatened my life and my family and most of our group. Well, I decided to move to US because my wife was citizen, and I say, okay, we need to change this. We need to stop this for a while because this is going to end bad for us eventually. Like you said, and many environmentalists in Mexico, in Central America, in Brazil, in many parts of the world, they are dead now, many, because this is the main problem. Public and common use versus individual and few people, you know. So, well, the most satisfactory that I had was helping these people, changing the law, helping to change the view in Mexican society about how to handle the public lands, the common lands, the private lands for the benefits of everybody, for the country, you know. And we work probably with 10,000 at the end, with 10,000 um, mm, communities, individual communities, uh, with now harvesting by themselves and um, elevating the level of his life, their life. Also, the other satisfaction was working with the Congress, because when we met in the Congress, we we can see how a lot of interest in not change the law. Don't touch this, don't touch that, because you are going to change my income. Even the representatives, they represent uh, other interests other than the people first. And uh, when I was in charge of the office in two different states, I had to deal with people that doesn't respect the law and harvesting illegal the forest, killing the wildlife, and destroying the environment. But at the end, working with the people give us a lot of satisfactions, because and now probably 12% of the, is not much, 12% of the forest area, and tropical and temperate, they are now working by themselves and with their own industry. Also, these people develop a consciousness about protecting, and they are participating in the all the protected areas that the government has declared. Working with right studies, management plans, and helping the government to change this process. So those were the main satisfaction that I got in my tenure as a forest in Mexico. And also helping, we don't know too much in 75, we don't know about the environment, but we get involved because the movement was pushing, and hey, we need to take care of the air, the soil, the water, all the species. And then everything changed in Mexico about that, starting in the 80s, 88, and now, and until now, with the new law, the new modification in 2018.
So, what do you think that Mexico has done right in terms of land management that the U.S. might learn from? Is it, as you've described, this work empowering communities to manage their own forests and to be able to be entrepreneurs and profit for them, or is it sort of more a broader respect for the environment, or are there other pieces or examples that you think the U.S. could learn from what Mexico has done in terms of forestry?
I have something to add to that, if I can.
Sure, Chris, go ahead.
And what would you say that the government's role in public land should be?
Excuse me again, please.
And what do you think what would you say that the government's role in public lands should actually be?
Well, the role of the government is use the politics in the society. Well, the politics is try to gather all the specific interest in one common interest as much as possible, because the government has the power to call all the actors in this area to sit in the same table, and try to reach a common goal that benefits in less on more way one of the actors. You have the power of that. The other thing, the government needs to support this activity in the public lands and natural areas, because the problem is the government use the money sometimes in things that is not worth. They need to put money. They need to subsidize some areas. The government needs to give the technical and financial support to become these areas viable, not just in the paper, but in reality. So that's the main things that the government must do, the role the government needs to do in these areas.
So maybe one or two more questions from me, and then we'll open it up more broadly. Thank you for asking that, though, Christopher. I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit more about your personal journey to the United States and how you came to be, how you ended up in Boise or working with Boise State, and if there's anything about that that journey of kind of leaving behind your time and expertise in forests and then using it differently in the U.S. that you would like to share with us.
Sure. Well, after 25 of years working 24/7 practically, and I reach an like a dead end in my life because as I explained, I had a lot of enemies everywhere in this top with the people with the big industry. And I decided to stop a little bit, And my wife was U.S. citizen years before, and we decided to move to the U.S. And we decided to Boise because we wanted a quiet place and, and to raise our kids and our family. Unfortunately, now and in those days, my English was not pretty good. So I started working in different areas and private landscape companies and assembly companies. Meanwhile, I started speaking English, and I decided to start with BSU because I wanted to change the landscape. In those days were terrible in PSU, terrible. And I wanted to contribute, but also because the university, you had the opportunity to know really smart people, researchers, a lot of events, scientists. So I wanted to stay in touch with this environment in Boise State. That's why I landed here. And also not just in the landscaping area, trying to improve the department, trying to improve the techniques. And my goal is to become, that the BSU campus becomes one of the 10 most beautiful campuses in the country. It's a vision, but we're going. Also I got involved in the Association of Classified Employees, trying to improve the classified employee work conditions and life. And one of the good things, I participate really strong in the last process of selecting new president, trying and asking openly for a servant leader. Fortunately, President Trump was selected, and now we have that because we want people that listen us as an employees. Well, that's another part of my job that I decide to come to the United States.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And your English is magnificent. Giving an entire lecture to a class of 25 in your second language is no small feat. So we appreciate that for sure. And if anybody that speaks Spanish would like to ask a question of Emilio in Spanish, that would be that would be welcome as well. So I guess the last question then is if and thank you for the work you've done on Boise State's landscaping as well. It is a beautiful place, and it's one that I hope we get to go back and enjoy more in the coming months. This is no small charge to be looking out for the lives of classified employees at this moment as well. So thank you for combining all of those things in what's already a challenging context with COVID and whatnot. But the last question I'd like to ask you, and then we'll get to some of the excellent questions students have put up in the chat, is if there's anything else you would like to share with us about your experiences in Mexico and how they translate to the United States, or what it was that you learned in those decades of working for Mexico's forests that we might benefit from.
Sure. One of the things that I want to share is when I travel to being a student and working in Mexico, when I travel to US and Canada, my first impression was, oh, where is the people? You know, no people here in the forest. Where is the people? You know, oh God, this is excellent. You can do whatever you want with the techniques because there's no people. The other thing it was the I was able to see in the real life, real context, all the silviculture techniques that we cannot use in Mexico. You know, you use cutting everything, you know, and cutting different levels of the techniques that they use. Also, the multiple use of the resource. I learned here in the US and in Canada about producing water, multi-purpose in recreation, you know, control the fire to reduce the organic matter in the soil. So, well, I was kind of enjoying. You think, oh, this is possible. You know, this is possible. It was amazing, and also the knowledge and sharing with the U.S. forest about the knowledge and the equipment. Oh my gosh, it was pretty good. In those days, 70, 75, 80s, Mexico, we have a couple of shovels and that's it. And we have planes, you know, fighting the fires, wildfires. Oh, that was my impression when I traveled to the first time to US and Canada. And also in Canada, I had the opportunity to discuss with some indigenous people and the government of Canada because they have a conflict in those days because one of the indigenous community, they wanted probably half a million of acres of land. And the Canadian forest, they say, hey, why do you want this land? And the people, indigenous people, they say, just for walk. It's just for walk. Walk? You need to produce. You need to cut those trees. You need. And the people say, no, I just for walk. We saw these two visions, you know, the different visions that in Mexico was really, really striking. And what did we learn in this process in Mexico? It's all about this power and money. If you have the power and you have the money, you can change things. That's why that's why it's really important that the people get involved and get educated and elevate the consciousness about the protecting the environment or house. Because if few people has the power, they can destroy. If the community with elevate consciousness about the human being and about the nature, we can keep our house clean, health, and safe. People first. That's the motto. People first. So we need to fight for a pristine and efficient administration. The government needs to be honest, pristine, and effective. And we need to be a researchers, cutting edge, to invent a lot of things to protect and get advantage of our environment. So that's what did I learn in my process in the as a forester, environmentalist principle.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for that. Go ahead, Christopher. Did you have a question?
Yeah. When you say invent, do you mean like find more reasons to protect land and stuff like that.
Well, what was the first part?
I think you said invent and invent reasons. Do you mean like come up with new reasons to protect wild land, or am I misunderstanding?
Well, what I'm trying to say is um, invent new technology, discover new technology in order to protect better our resources. The government needs to put more money in research to discover better techniques, and better equipment to protect our public lands
We
and
might
the
think of that
nature in general.
innovation might be sort of a more expansive way of thinking that, if that clarifies.
Just one really quick one example. In the 18th century in New York, people was really worried about the horse waste in the streets, and they say, "Oh my gosh, in 50 years it'll be impossible to remove this." Well, then the oil come, the cars, and that idea was no valid. But in those days, oh my gosh, the people was worried in New York about the horses, you know. That's why the government needs to put a lot of money in invention, new techniques and new technology.
Alyssa has a good question, going back a little bit to the creation of reserves and forest reserves and protected areas. And she was curious, and you can add to this, Alyssa, if you'd like to, if there were conflicts over those. We've talked about several conflicts within the US, current times and also past, over the creation of reserves. And Alyssa's asking if there were conflicts between the government and people living in them when they were created. And are there any examples of that you would like to share? And Alyssa, if I've messed up your question, feel free to rephrase it.
Go ahead, Alicia.
Yeah, that was just basically what I was going to ask. Like, were there any issues with the people of Mexico and between the government because of the creation of the reserves, like you were talking about, to conserve the land, or build waterways and stuff like that? Were there conflicts with people of Mexico, and maybe more specifically the indigenous people who own land in the forest?
Well, yeah, it was a lot of conflicts because the government was interested in protect the areas. And then they declare, okay, this area, nobody can touch it, or you can touch it when I authorize that. The problem was that the people has the necessities to wood, water, pasture, everything, and the government was not giving those people alternatives. Okay, I'm going to close this area, national park, reserve, whatever you decided, and you have this opportunity. I'm going to training you to protect this area and giving you this opportunity in other economical activities. No, nothing. So the people was at some point without the small benefits using the land, because the government said this is a protected area and you are not giving me other option to sustain my family. So the conflict start because the people keep cutting the trees, expanding the land for agriculture or pastures. And at some point, the government just declared some areas in the paper, because in the reality, the people keep going with cutting the trees and destroying the natural resources. Yes. a lot of conflicts.
So Eli and Stephanie both had questions about redistribution, about ejidos kind of more generally. Stephanie was curious if ejidos were still common and if they are now allowed to be sold. And Eli asked if they had, if you feel like the redistribution in Mexico was more successful or that the redistribution in the US was. Stephanie or Eli, feel free to correct the questions if that would be helpful.
Yeah, I was just curious if they are still intact and if they're still passed down through families. And I guess if there's been any additional redistribution in a similar context since the original.
Well, I want to explain that before the 1910 revolution, most of the land was in a few hands, in the kind of the feudal economic system. You know, one owner with the like the kings in the 12th century in Europe. You know, one king with the people like as servants. You know, all the land belongs to the king, and the people was working for the king. Similar in Mexico with the haciendas. The haciendas was just one owner, huge amount of land, and the people inside that land, communities, indigenous or mestizos, or all the rest of the people working with this person. Then came the revolution, and the revolution broke this system, and all the land was for the country. And then start the redistribution to all these people that one time was working for the king. Now they have their own land working for the family. The ejido was kind of this kind of figure, really similar to the indigenous communities. The people that had no land before the 1910 revolution, they gather and have one piece of land to produce the basic necessities, and the rest of the land work in common. So the people that before 1910 have no land, after 1917, they start having land from the government in this structure. Yeah, that was the redistribution of the land. Yeah.
But they can now be sold. So these are changes that went into effect with NAFTA in 1994, and then with several amendments to that piece of the Constitution in the year 2000 that allowed ejidos to be sold. And so now most of them have been kind of dismantled, and property titles have been given out if that's what the ejido decides to do. So that's allowed for the development, especially of resort areas and sort of tourist places. A lot of ejidos in tourist areas have devolved into private landholding, but there still are in kind of middle Mexico, in the bulk of Mexico, and in a lot of forests, ejidos that are intact. So I would say that the sort of current situation is kind of a hybrid. Most of them have started the process, but there are still ejidos that are intact. So the regulation that they could not be sold has been removed, but it hasn't resulted in all of them being sold. So it's kind of a liminal space right now, which is kind of interesting. I don't know if you know more about that than I do, Emilio. I'm sure you do, but that's.
No, you're right. You're totally right. We have a similar in 1857 when the reform laws by President Juarez. He opened because the land was in possession of the communities the Catholic Church. They have a huge extensions. So with that law, he broke that structure and opened the land to the market. So boom, one day to another, the communities were no land. Well, in the 1992, like you said, the 27 article of the Constitution related to the possession of the land and the ejidos, again, open to the market, because in those days, the new economic scheme was trying to go to the liberalism, probably open everything, minimum state and huge private activity. So in that process, the land and the ejidos were able to sold the land. It was broken, that scheme. You're right. Yeah.
There's another interesting parallel too with that process, with something that Professor Patty Limerick talked about, which is the land in the U.S. West has always been attached to water rights to make it more valuable, and the same was true in Mexico. When land was arable or you could grow things on it because it had access to irrigation or to water, those more profitable lands are the ones that have been privatized now. And so the lands that are less marketable are the ones that seem to remain in communities. And so there's an interesting parallel with the US West and a lot of Mexican territory there. Let me open it up to other questions, either from the chat that have gone up and I've missed, or if other questions that people have. Please go ahead and take yourself off mute and ask.
Okay, I'll go. So I was trying to do a little research on Mexican protected areas before this class. Am I right that there's no wilderness or designated wilderness or legal wilderness in Mexico? And do you think that's because, like what you talked about, people live in those areas? I guess my main question is, do you see a difference between the way that protected areas are viewed in Mexico and the US in terms of the way that they relate to people?
Well, I think, yeah, the big difference between the public lands and in general the land between Mexico and US is because the people,
Mm-hmm.
the people, since, like I said, 10,000 years, Mexico has been with different cultures.
Mm-hmm.
So in US, you can, the government purchase and grab huge portion of land, and he was the owner, and the population was few, small amount of people in the US in those days when they purchased the land or acquired the land. And in this situation, the government had more room to do things in US. In Mexico was a little bit limited because you have people there with interest created for years and years. So the natural areas, when the government declared natural areas, he needs to deal with the people already there. And I already mentioned, government declared natural areas, but had not giving to the people inside other economic option. So the conflict was automatically. In US, you have the opportunity to big areas declare because you have no people, like in Mexico, the amount and the ancestry, And then in US, you have the opportunity to say, okay, I need to do this in the West, big areas like we have in the West, natural areas. So you can use practically as you want, right? Paying debts or paying soldiers or selling to private properties, and get money for other projects. I think this is the main difference. US have more room to move in different options, protecting or giving to the people.
And Mexico was the differential population and the demographic shift happened at different times, right? And so Mexico's population was expanding and already larger at a time when dispossession of Native Americans in the US had taken place, right? And so the sort of chronologies don't match up with the demographic shifts in a similar way. So it's an interesting difference in that way. Emilio, let me thank you once again, and we'll conclude here. If students have other questions, they can follow up through me or they can reach out to you. But many students have put up in the chat that they're so grateful for your time and sharing with us today, and also so appreciative that you make campus so beautiful for us. So thank you for sharing your experiences. Thank you for taking all of this knowledge you built up in Mexico and giving it back to us in Boise over the years and over time, and we're so grateful for this. So, gracias.
De nada, and I know it's a short time for a huge amount of information we cannot handle, but if somebody have a question or they want to know a little bit about more specific, you have my phone, and I work in landscaping service in BSU. Don't hesitate to reach me. I can talk.
That's very generous of you. Thank you, Emilio. And Mackenzie and I will be in touch again with the transcript and sort of as we move forward. It'll probably be a few months, but we certainly would like to figure out how we might include pieces of this interview as a chapter in the commemorative volume for John Freemuth, and to sort of point out all of the wonderful complexities and diversity of our public land. So thanks again, and we'll be in touch about that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Super. If students have extra questions, they're welcome to stay online, either for me or for Emilio. Otherwise, we'll see you on Friday for Jim Lyons.
I have a question.
Yes.
What kind, are there any like specific practices that you're using for on-campus groundskeeping that are maybe outside the realm of normal, or even experimental, or otherwise deemed unordinary or unorthodox that you may be using or inclined to using?
That was for me.
Yes,
Emilio. Sorry about that. Is there anything in landscaping that you're doing that is innovative or unorthodox or unusual?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, the first thing we try to do when I arrived in the landscaping area was trying to be efficient and use the modern techniques, because in those days the people was low training. We have no equipment, proper personal protective equipment. So the first thing was, let's be efficient. Let's try to be efficient, getting training for the people and trying to acquire the right tool for the right job. So now we are using mechanical spreaders, pesticides, and trying to move to less use of pesticides, and processing all the organic material when we prune trees, when we collect the leaves in the fall, when we mow the lawn. We are processing all this organic matter and produce mulch that we reuse in the beds or in tree rings. So And I think the next step in now is trying to, well, we reach an acceptable level now. You can see the lawn green, you can see the streets clean, you can see the trees pruned. But now our next challenge is design the kind of campus that we want in the future. And that's why the president Trump opened the forum for the planning for the next 5 years. So that's why we need to take advantage of this process and decide what kind of campus we want regarding to the landscaping. So yeah, that's our process of advancing and being our basic landscaping people to the professional high tech people in BSU campus.
Right on. So when it, so me personally, I've done quite a bit of research into what's called permaculture. And now I'm learning a lot of the basic principles of permaculture are kind of like these stormwater management practices, these best management practices that have been developed through the years using swales and infiltration systems. So do you, as the Boise State campus, I'll say curator, do you see, is your vision of what the campus is going to look like, does it impart some of these overall systems, or is it more of a beautification process maybe?
Well, we recognize that the landscaping and the buildings and infrastructure plays a big role for the students' enrollment. So it's really important to think about getting the best campus as possible. In this process, you're right. We need to think in techniques like we need to eliminate all the chemicals and back to the natural process to control weeds, to improve the lawn. We need to use the roof gardens to protect from and save energy, the permaculture. If we that's why in this process for the planning for the next years, we are trying to think in one sustainable environmental campus and beautifying also. We are thinking, in fountains. We need a fountain in campus. We have no fountain, right? Only the Boise River that is running here, right? That kind is now our next challenge. We now have a nice green lawn everywhere, some flowers. We reach some level to beautification, but the next level is challenging. Is sustainability, is beautification, is think out of the box, like the president is asking all of us. Yeah.
You said that they opened a forum. I think I missed that. Is where can I go to make recommendations or participate in that?
There's a page for the strategic plan that has a list of all the open forums. And so one of the interesting things the president has done is categorize them into different focus areas. So, one of them is serve all of Idaho. And I think they have an open forum tomorrow on that. The one that I've been participating in is on innovation. I think it's pursue innovation. But
Yes.
there's also, research, and there's like 3 others. But if you just go to the homepage and look up the strategic plan, you haven't missed it. It's all happening right now. It's all
Yes.
being crammed into October. So
Okay.
like Zoom meetings on top of Zoom meetings on top of Zoom meetings. But yeah, if you have opinions, I would highly encourage you to attend some of the open forums, and the links should be on that strategic planning webpage. I don't quite understand, as being part of one of these groups, how students are being incorporated. And sort of at every turn, I'm like, well, what about graduate students? And, when are we talking to undergraduate students? And so I've put forward lots of individual names for our particular ones. But like I said, there's sort of 5 different strands that are all ongoing. And, classified staff is another one, faculty is another one, professional staff, so there's these sort of categories of input they're seeking. But if you have input, put it. Go put it somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a blessing and a curse to be so opinionated.
Right. Right. Emilio, can I ask where the water for landscaping comes from? Does it come from the irrigation district, or does it come from the river, or is it just city water?
We have 2 sources. One is from the city. The city is from the University Drive to the south. We are using city water. From the University Drive to the north, all that area is from the canal.
Huh.
Yes, is cheap water.
Yeah. Interesting.
So
good. I just thought of that, and I never had anybody to ask that, and so now that's also a neat piece of the sustainability.
And
right?
the next probably the next couple of years, the whole campus will be with the canal water, saving money, because the city water is too expensive.
Yeah, interesting. Great. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Jessica, did you have a question?
No, but I mean, do you have a favorite landscape part at Boise State?
My favorite part?
Yes.
Oh, is the quad is my favorite part. The quad. Yes.
You like all that green grass?
Well, yeah. It's because it's the center, it's the core of it, and I've been dreaming for the past years, but build a fountain over there, honoring the Boise River, just pretty close. So putting that a nice artistic fountain with rocks and in the quad, it'll be nice. And in the night with a lot of different lights, Well, that's why I prefer the quad. I love the quad.
It's such a great idea. Every Mexican pueblo has a fountain, right? Yeah. There's the plaza, and there's the government building, and there's the church, and there's a fountain. There's almost never any water in it, right? But there's always a fountain, and our fountain can have lights and water. I love it. That's a great idea. Yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah, I'm sold. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thanks everyone. Thank you so much, Emilio, and we'll be in touch again soon. And hopefully, I'll see you at some of the forums. And thank you, everyone else. We'll see you on Friday.
Thank you.